The dogs behind Sandra Kowalski's fence went off at 4 in the morning, and this time she knew it wasn't a raccoon. Their barking came sharp and desperate, aimed at Carl Whitman's driveway across the road, at the old blue pickup that hadn't moved in 3 days. She stepped onto the porch in her robe, listened, and felt her stomach turn. Something inside that truck was wrong. Before we go on, tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. She stood there for a long minute, gripping the porch rail, because a woman of 56 years does not run barefoot down a country road at 4 in the morning without first asking herself if she is imagining things. But the barking would not stop, and it was not the kind of barking she had heard from those 3 mutts before. It was not the raccoon bark, not the delivery truck bark, not the coyote bark. It was the sound of something being witnessed and no one answering. It was the sound of dogs who had given up on a language people understood and were shouting anyway, in the only language they had, because someone they knew was somewhere they should not be. Sandra had lived on Maple Creek Road for 12 years. She had never once heard her dogs make that sound. She went back inside for her phone. Her hand hovered over the screen for a full minute. She thought about who she was and how the sheriff's dispatchers already knew her. She was Sandra Kowalski, the woman on Maple Creek who called about the neighbor's mailbox one time. She was going to be, in a few hours, the woman who called about Carl Whitman's blue truck. She hated to be that woman. She hated to be any kind of woman that a dispatcher had a file on. But her dogs, Rocky and Duke and Little Brown June, had gone quiet all at once and then started up again, worse than before. And Sandra pressed the button and told the dispatcher, in a voice she almost did not recognize as her own, that she was sorry to bother them. But something was wrong at her neighbor's house, and she did not know what. Officer Tara Simmons was on Maple Creek Road within 20 minutes of that dispatch. She was 28 years old, 4 years on the force, and she had learned early that the calls that mattered most were the ones that started with, "I feel silly for calling, but..." Sandra had said exactly those words. Tara had told her over the radio to sit tight and to lock the front door. The morning was still grey when Tara pulled up behind the pickup. The dogs had gone hoarse. They were not lunging anymore. They were pacing the fence in a tight, tired circle, whining, keeping their heads pointed at the truck as if some invisible line ran from their throats to the driver's window. Tara stepped out with her flashlight already on. She circled the truck first. She'd learned to do that, to walk once around a scene before touching anything. The tires were dusty. The bed of the truck held a coil of garden hose, an empty feed sack, and a crumpled receipt from a hardware store dated 3 days back. There were no skid marks in the driveway, no sign of forced entry. The keys were still in the ignition, half-turned, as if their owner had come out to grab something small and then had not quite finished coming back inside. She pressed her flashlight to the driver's window. The glass, fogged from the inside, told her more than she wanted to know. Human breath, condensed and cooled and refogged over hours and hours, leaves a print inside a windshield that anyone who has ever pulled a graveyard shift will recognize. She wiped a patch clear with the side of her thumb. Carl Whitman was slumped forward, his forehead against the steering wheel, his right hand still curled around a keyring on his lap. Tara had never met the man in her life, but she knew him already. The grey flannel shirt tucked carefully into brown work pants, the white hair combed neatly to one side, the small silver cross pinned to his collar. He was a man who had gotten dressed properly to go out to his own driveway and grab something from the bed of his truck. Then she saw the movement. Beside him on the bench seat was a golden retriever. Just barely a golden retriever anymore. The fur was matted and dulled by dust and heat. The eyes cracked open only halfway. The dog's ribs showed. Her tongue lay half out of her mouth like something forgotten. But when the beam of Tara's flashlight crossed her, the eyes opened just enough to register it, and the tail that a golden retriever cannot help but move when a human comes near, no matter how far gone she is, thumped once against the cracked vinyl seat, just once. Then she went still again. She went still. Tara said quietly into the empty morning, "Oh, girl." She stepped back and reached for her radio, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, because Sandra was still standing on her porch across the road, and Sandra could see her clearly. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor and a wagon, and I need veterinary services from the county line. Non-critical human, deceased, live animal in bad shape. Bring water and a fluid kit, and call ahead to the vet on Rocky Ford Road. Tell her it's a retriever, and tell her it's Carl Whitman's." She hung the radio up and walked around to the passenger side. The window had been cracked open, maybe 2 inches at the top, the way a man leaves a window cracked when his dog rides shotgun for a 5-minute errand. Not cracked enough for a full-grown retriever to squeeze back out of. Not by half. Tara pulled her jacket off and folded it over her arm. She was thinking about Carl Whitman going out to his truck for something, a tool, a wrench, whatever, and about the golden retriever hopping through that gap the way golden retrievers always do, and about how Carl must have said her name, and about how she must have nuzzled his knee under the wheel, and about how somewhere in that ordinary moment his chest had seized and gone quiet. 2 days in a July heat, on a country road in eastern Tennessee, with a half-empty water bottle rolling on the passenger floor. She wiggled the driver's door handle. It gave, not locked. Country people rarely lock their trucks. She opened the door slowly, both because she did not want to startle the dog, and because she did not want to disturb Carl any more than the last 2 days already had. The air that came out of the cab was thick with the sweetness of the end of a life, and the sourness of a living body trying not to fail. Tara had smelled both before. She never got used to either. The dog turned her head just slightly. Her nose lifted an inch toward Tara's outstretched hand, and then she did something Tara would later tell her partner about for weeks. She leaned across Carl's arm, pressed her snout once against the flannel sleeve, slow, deliberate, the way a dog says thank you when there are no more words for it, and then she let herself be lifted. Tara carried her out of the truck like a child. She weighed less than a bag of feed. She should have weighed twice that. The vet unit was still 5 miles out. Tara sat down right there in the driveway with the retriever across her lap and told her over and over, you're all right, girl. You did good." Sandra crossed the road then. She had put on shoes. She was carrying a chipped ceramic bowl of water, and her hand was shaking so hard the surface rippled. She knelt down in the gravel next to Tara and set the bowl in the grass. "Her name's Biscuit," Sandra whispered. The retriever lifted her head enough to lap once at the water, not more. She was too far gone to drink freely. But she looked at Sandra with the kind of recognition that comes only from repeated small kindnesses, and Sandra put a hand over her own mouth and started to cry. "He'd been out of town 3 days," Sandra said. "That's what I thought. That's what I told myself." "Mom," Tara said gently, "you did the right thing. You called. He never went anywhere without her, never. I should have. I should have knocked harder." "You called," Tara said again. "That's why she's alive." The vet unit arrived at 8:53. The tech was a young man with red hair and freckles who moved with the calm speed of someone who had done this too many times. He knelt down in the gravel beside them, ran his hands along Biscuit's ribs, checked her gums, and slid a fluid line into the flat vein on her front leg with the ease of a nurse who could find a vein blindfolded. Sandra sat down cross-legged in the gravel and held one paw in both her hands the whole time. She would tell her sister later that it was the way you hold the hand of someone in a hospital bed, the small paw in her palm, the little calloused pads, the yellowed nails Carl had trimmed himself the week before. Behind Sandra's fence, 20 yards away, her 3 dogs had gone completely quiet. They lay flat in the yard, their heads on their paws, watching, as if they had done what they came to do, as if they had needed only one person to finally listen. By the time Carl Whitman was taken out of the truck and lifted into the county wagon, the sun was fully up, and the neighbors were beginning to gather at the ends of their driveways. The Ferris boys from the next house came out in shorts and stood side by side without saying anything. A woman named Angela in a nightgown watched from her porch and crossed herself twice. Tara stood at the tailgate of the wagon for a moment, out of respect. She had never met Carl. She would tell her partner later that she felt standing there, that she had known him for years. She would not know for another 48 hours how right that feeling was. Jennifer Whitman got the call at 11 in the morning. She was in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Knoxville with her laptop open on her passenger seat, half a granola bar in her mouth and the other half in her hand. She was 44 years old, an operations manager at a hospital, and she had not spoken to her father since Easter, a phone call of 9 minutes that ended, as most of their calls ended, with him telling her not to worry about him and her telling him she'd try to come up soon. She never came up soon. There had been a project at the hospital, a merger, a personnel crisis, and then a small failed relationship with a man from radiology, and then another project. And the months had eaten themselves the way months do when you're not paying attention. She dropped the granola bar and forgot she was on hands-free. She said, "What?" 3 times. Then she said, "I'm on my way," and hung up on the officer, and sat there in the parking lot for a long minute staring at her steering wheel. The drive to Maple Creek was 2 hours and 12 minutes on a good day. She made it in 1 hour and 50. She did not remember most of it. She remembered a bridge over the Little Pigeon River. She remembered a billboard for a chain of chicken restaurants. She remembered, and this was the thing she thought about later, at 3 in the morning when she could not sleep, that at some point on the highway she had reached over to change the radio station and had accidentally caught the middle of a hymn her father used to play in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. She had not changed the station after that. She had let it play. She had thought, "He is somewhere between here and there right now." When she pulled into the driveway, the truck was gone, taken to the sheriff's yard for inventory. But Sandra was waiting on Carl's porch, sitting on the top step with her elbows on her knees, and beside her, on a folded quilt, was Biscuit, the fluid line taped to her front leg and running to a bag that Sandra was holding up like it was the most important thing she had ever held. Jennifer got out of her car and did not cry. That was the thing she would remember about herself later, that she did not cry for the first 4 hours. She walked up the steps, and Sandra stood, and Sandra hugged her without asking, and Jennifer hugged her back and looked over Sandra's shoulder into the open front door of her father's house. "He's inside?" Jennifer asked. "No, honey. They took him to Sevier, but the officer waited for you. She's in the kitchen." Jennifer walked in. Biscuit lifted her head when Jennifer passed. Biscuit had met Jennifer maybe 6 times in her whole life. Jennifer stopped and knelt down and put both hands on the golden head. Biscuit closed her eyes and pushed her nose against Jennifer's wrist and stayed there. And Jennifer thought, "She smells him on me. She smells the last time he hugged me." She stood up because if she stayed down another second, she was going to fall apart on the porch. Officer Tara Simmons was standing at the counter with her hat under her arm. She turned when Jennifer came in and offered her hand, and Jennifer shook it and said, "Thank you for staying," and could not think of a single other thing to say. Tara nodded like she understood, because she did, and gestured toward the kitchen table. "I didn't move anything," she said. "I wanted you to see it the way he left it. The kitchen was clean. It was the kitchen of a man who lived alone and refused to let his life fall to pieces on principle. The percolator was rinsed. The dish towel was folded over the oven handle. The salt and pepper shakers were on a small ceramic tray shaped like a hen, and on the table, in the middle of a placemat that had a picture of a covered bridge printed on it, was a grocery list." Jennifer sat down. The list was written in her father's handwriting. It said, eggs 1 dozen, bread whole wheat, apples small bag, milk 2%, dog food the good kind. Don't forget biscuits heartworm pill, 1st of the month. The last line was underlined twice. Jennifer's finger hovered over the paper. She did not touch it. She looked at the date on the top corner. Carl had always dated his lists, an accountant's habit he never lost, and she felt something crumple inside her chest, small and complete. He had written that list on the morning he died. He had underlined the reminder for the dog. He had not been afraid. He had not been ready. He had simply been making sure the dog got her medicine. She sat there with the officer standing quietly by the counter. Sandra was in the doorway with Biscuit's fluid bag lifted like a lantern. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cedar and something else. Some faint, clean laundry and toast smell that was her father. The smell of him. The smell of the house of a person who was still alive somewhere in the house's air. Jennifer looked up at Tara. "Officer," she said, "who takes care of a dog like her when—" "I do," Sandra said from the doorway. Jennifer looked at her. "I mean it," Sandra said. "I've known Biscuit since she was 10 weeks old. Your daddy brought her home from a shelter in Kingsport. She and my dogs know each other. They know her, honey. I'll take her." "I'll take her," Jennifer said. She said it without thinking. She said it the way you say "I'm home" when you walk in the door. She said it because a grocery list underlined twice had just rewritten her entire life. Sandra nodded slowly and did not argue. She said, "You'll need her food." He kept it in a metal bin by the back door, and her leash, and there's a little quilt she sleeps on in the mudroom, and her medicine, it's in the drawer under the phone, all lined up in a plastic tray. He was very particular about her medicine. Jennifer nodded back. She would nod for the rest of the afternoon at each new small thing Sandra told her about her father, and each nod would feel like a small key turning in a door she had not known was locked. By 4 in the afternoon, Jennifer had a duffel bag packed with Biscuit's things, a folder of paperwork from the county, a set of keys, and the beginning of an understanding that she did not know how to hold. Sandra had told her in fragments over the course of that afternoon small things about Carl she had never known, that he read on the porch every evening, that he waved at every school bus that went by, that he had for the past 1.5 years been quietly leaving bags of dog food on Sandra's porch on Wednesday mornings, that Sandra had lost her job at the mill last spring and had been eating tuna out of a can for weeks before the first bag showed up, that there had been no note, that she had known it was him only because Rocky had wagged his tail at Carl's fence for a week after. Jennifer sat down on the top step of the porch when Sandra told her that, and Sandra sat down beside her, and Sandra said softly, "I never said thank you. I never told him I knew." Jennifer looked out across the road at the fence, where the 3 dogs still lay in the grass, watching Biscuit on her father's porch. "He would have wanted you not to," she said. That was the first time she cried. She cried the way you cry when you have been holding your face still for 4 hours, and your face has finally decided it will not hold still any longer. Sandra put an arm around her shoulders. She did not say anything. She did not try to say the right thing. She simply sat there and let Jennifer cry the way you let a woman cry who is finally allowed to. When Jennifer straightened up, Sandra handed her a folded paper napkin from the pocket of her apron. "He'd be glad you came, honey," Sandra said. "He wouldn't say it, but he would be." "I know," Jennifer said. Her voice was thick. "That's the part that hurts." She stayed the night in Carl's house. She had not planned to. She had thought she would drive Biscuit back to Knoxville that evening and come back later in the week to sort things out. But Biscuit was not strong enough to travel yet, and Jennifer discovered, when she stood at the door to the guest bedroom, that Carl kept made up for her, that he had always kept made up for her, with the quilt her grandmother had sewn folded across the foot of the bed, that she could not leave. She slept badly. She slept on top of the covers, with Biscuit on the floor beside her, breathing in slow, careful puffs. the fluid line finally removed, and a bowl of soft food half-eaten on the mat. Jennifer woke up twice in the night and put her hand down over the side of the bed and felt Biscuit's warm side rise and fall. At 3 in the morning, she got up. She was thirsty. She walked into the kitchen without turning on the light and drank a glass of water at the sink. Then, because she could not sleep, and because she was standing in her father's house for the first time in almost 2 years, she began quietly to look. The living room was tidy. The mantel held 4 photographs: her mother Rosemary, dead now for 11 years, her father as a young man in a Navy uniform, a picture of Jennifer at 10 years old on a horse she had begged for and had ridden 3 times, and 1 photograph of Biscuit as a puppy in her father's lap on the same porch where Sandra had sat that afternoon. Above the mantel, on a hook, was a small wooden crucifix. Beside it hung a framed piece of paper Jennifer had never seen before. She stepped closer. It was a certificate. It was from the East Tennessee Companion Animal Rescue. It read, "In grateful recognition of Carl and Rosemary Whitman, whose quiet generosity has meant the world to us." It was dated 2 years back. Rosemary had been dead for 9 years by then. Jennifer stood there for a long time. She began then to look more carefully. In the drawer of the sideboard, she found a leather-bound ledger. On the cover, in his handwriting, it said, "Household." She opened it and expected utility bills. She found a column of dates and initials and amounts. The initials she did not recognize: MB, JR, DW, LP, and at the bottom, in every column, ETCAR. The amounts were small. $50 here, $200 there, $60 a week, every week, going back 3 years. The last entry was dated 4 days before her father died, and it said, in his careful accountant's hand, MB, tuition assistance, month of July, $400. Attached with a paper clip was a printed receipt from a community college in Sevierville. Jennifer sat down on the couch with the ledger in her lap. She stared at the letters MB. She stared at the receipt. She stared at ETCAR, which she now understood was the rescue on the certificate above the mantel. Her father had been sending money to people, to many people, for years. She was still sitting there at 5 in the morning when she heard the knock at the door. It was a soft knock, not urgent, not police. She stood up carefully and looked through the window and saw a man about her own age, standing on the porch with a small paper bag in his hand. He was black, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, and he was looking down at his feet. She opened the door. "I'm sorry, Ma'am," the young man said. "I know it's early. I saw the light on. My name is Marcus Bell. I've been driving by every hour for 2 days. I heard about Mr. Whitman." Jennifer stared at him. "You knew my father?" Marcus's mouth trembled, and he pressed his lips together to steady it. "Ma'am, your father paid for me to go to nursing school. I graduate in the spring." She let him in. His name was Marcus Bell, and he was 26 years old. He sat on the edge of her father's couch with his elbows on his knees and told her, in the careful voice of a young man trying not to break down in front of a stranger, that 4 years ago his mother, Yvonne Bell, had been the woman who came in 3 days a week to sit with Rosemary Whitman during the last months of her illness. That Rosemary had adored her. That Rosemary had made Carl promise, before she died, that he would look after Yvonne. That Yvonne had died herself only 14 months later, of fast lung cancer, 49 years old, and that Carl had shown up at the funeral in a grey suit and had walked up to Marcus, then 22 years old, and standing by his mother's casket with no idea what he was going to do, and had said quietly, "You're going to finish your schooling. I'm going to help. Don't argue with me." "It's what Rosemary wanted. He wrote checks," Marcus said. His voice cracked. "Every month to the school, and a little bit to me for books. He never let me thank him more than once a year. He said the debt wasn't mine. He said I was already carrying enough." Jennifer looked at the ledger on the coffee table. MB, month after month. 200 here, 400 there, tuition assistance, books, a line labeled shoes, $70, 3 winters ago. Marcus reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small ceramic jar of honey. "I brought this for him," he said. "It's from the co-op down in Newport. He always said he liked local honey. I was going to drop it off yesterday. I didn't know." He set the jar carefully on the coffee table. Then Marcus Bell, who was 6'2" and 3 months from being a registered nurse, put his face in his hands and cried the way a son cries. Jennifer sat down beside him and put her hand on his back. She would remember later that she did not think about herself once during those few minutes. She thought only that her father had known this young man's mother, and that her father had known Sandra's need for dog food, and that her father had built a life she had had no idea about, and that every one of those small acts had left a trace in a ledger she had almost not opened. By the time the sun came fully up, Marcus had told her about 3 other people her father had helped. A widow named Louise Perkins, who lived out by the reservoir, whose gutters Carl had repaired one November, and whose oil bill Carl had quietly paid the following February, when the pipes almost froze. A mechanic named Danny Whitworth, whose shop had almost gone under 2 winters ago, and whose lease Carl had covered for 3 months, without ever letting Danny say the word loan. A young woman named Jenna Ruiz, who had aged out of foster care at 19 and had needed 6 months of rent to keep her from sleeping in her car, and who now, at 22, worked at the veterinary clinic in Sevierville and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat and, according to Marcus, called Carl the granddad I never had. The initials in the ledger began to have faces. At 8 in the morning, Sandra came across the road with a thermos of coffee. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Marcus, and Marcus stood up to greet her, and Sandra said his name before he said it himself. "You're Yvonne's boy," she said. "Yes, Mum." "He talked about you." Sandra smiled through fresh tears. "Every time you got a grade back. Every single time." Jennifer went into the kitchen to fetch a mug for Sandra. When she came back, Marcus was on his knees beside Biscuit, and Biscuit, who had eaten almost nothing since the truck, was accepting a piece of banana out of his hand. Marcus was murmuring to her the way a person murmurs to a small child in a hospital bed. "That's it. That's a good girl. 1 bite. That's a whole big bite." Sandra watched him and did not say anything, and then she looked at Jennifer with an expression Jennifer could not quite read, an expression that was somewhere between grief and awe, and something like pride, as if to say, "Do you see the man your father raised without ever meaning to?" Jennifer would remember that afternoon for the rest of her life, not for what she found in the house, but for what she almost missed. Because it was that afternoon that Bruce Halloran came up the driveway. He came in a black pickup that was too new to be a work truck and too clean to be anyone's daily driver. He wore boots without a scuff on them. He got out with a leather folio under his arm and knocked at the door with 3 sharp knocks, the way a man knocks who has done this before. Jennifer opened the door. "Are you the daughter?" he said. "I'm Jennifer Whitman." "Bruce Halloran. I own the property line to your east." He gestured vaguely toward the trees. "I'm sorry for your loss. I need 5 minutes of your time." She let him into the entryway. She did not offer him a seat. He opened the folio. He took out a document. He set it on the small table where her father had kept his hat. "Your father and I had an arrangement," he said, "signed 12 days ago. He agreed to sell me the back 4 acres of this property for a fair price. This is the letter of intent. He was going to close by the end of the month." Jennifer looked at the paper. Her father's signature was on the bottom. So was Bruce Halloran's. She looked up at him. "My father didn't tell me anything about a sale," she said. "He wouldn't have," Halloran said, and the corner of his mouth did a small thing that was not quite a smile. He kept his business quiet. "Look, Miss Whitman, I don't want to make this harder than it has to be. The deal was done. I've got a hearing scheduled for Friday to confirm the intent. I just need you to sign the acknowledgement form and we can move forward." Marcus stepped into the entryway. He had heard from the kitchen. Halloran looked at him. His face did the small thing again. "You a lawyer?" he asked. "I'm a friend of the family," Marcus said very quietly. Halloran took a breath. He looked back at Jennifer. He held out a pen. "I'll leave the paperwork with you," he said. "You have until Friday. There's an acknowledgement form on the last page. Sign it and we can close. My number's on the folder." He left the folio on the table. He left the pen beside it. He walked out. Jennifer picked up the pen. It was heavy, brass, a pen you give to a man for the closing of a real estate deal. It had Halloran Development engraved along the barrel. She held it for a long moment. Then she set it very carefully back down on the paper. "Marcus," she said, "I want you to sit down and tell me everything you know about Bruce Halloran." He sat down. He said, "He's been trying to buy your father's land for 2 years. Your father wouldn't sell, not for any price. That's what your father told my mother before she died. He said, 'Rosemary and I bought this land to be a quiet place, and it's going to stay a quiet place.'" Marcus's voice steadied. "Miss Whitman, your father didn't sign that paper." Sandra came in from the porch. She had been listening at the screen. "He didn't sign it," she said. "I'll tell you exactly why. Bruce Halloran was over here 3 weeks ago yelling at your daddy so loud I heard him from my kitchen window. Your daddy came out on the porch after and just sat with his hands on his knees for a long time. And when I went over, I brought him a plate of biscuits because I could see he wasn't right. He told me, straight up, 'Sandra, that man will get this land over my dead body.'" Sandra sat down slowly on the couch. "Those were his words," she said, "not mine." Jennifer sat down beside her. She looked at Halloran's letter. She looked at her father's signature. "It looks like his handwriting," she said. "He was an accountant for 40 years, Sandra said. "His signature was on every check in 3 counties. There's not a person alive who couldn't practice it." Marcus reached over and picked up the pen. He turned it over in his hand. "Miss Whitman," he said, "we need a lawyer." She looked at him, and she looked at Sandra, and she looked at Biscuit on the quilt by the door. She said, "Yes, we do." The lawyer's name was Delia Fontaine. Marcus knew her because she taught a night class on medical ethics at the community college. She agreed to come out to Maple Creek that same evening. She arrived at 7:45 in a rented car with a briefcase and a small dog of her own named Milo asleep in the passenger seat. She left Milo in the car with the windows cracked and came up to the porch. And Jennifer thought, standing at the door, watching this woman with silver hair and a raincoat come up her father's steps, that in a small town, everything is connected to everything else, and it always has been. Delia read the letter of intent at the kitchen table. She read it twice. She turned it under the light. "This paper is 30-pound copy stock," she said. "Your father used 24-pound linen for anything important. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this is dated a Tuesday, and your father was in Sevierville that Tuesday. I know because he was at the co-op meeting. I saw him there myself." She looked up. "Miss Whitman, I'm not going to promise you anything until I see more, but I would like to see everything your father kept in his study." Jennifer nodded. Delia stayed until midnight. Sandra brought over a casserole made of noodles and chicken and cream of mushroom soup, the kind of casserole that gets made in the South when someone dies. Marcus made coffee. Delia laid her briefcase open on the dining room table and produced yellow legal pads and thin black pens with the fluency of a woman who had built her practice one file box at a time. They went through Carl's study, every drawer, every folder, every ledger book, and they built, piece by piece, a portrait of a man who had lived twice. He had lived as Carl Whitman, retired accountant, quiet neighbor, widowed husband. and he had lived as the sole trustee of a small, unregistered fund he had set up 2 years after Rosemary died, a fund he had called in his own hand, on the inside of the first ledger, Rosemary's Kindness. There was no paperwork with the state. There was no tax filing. There was only a leather-bound book of names and amounts and dates going back 9 years, and a shoebox of receipts and thank-you notes and small folded letters from people Jennifer had never heard of. And at the very bottom of the shoebox, this was the thing Delia found at 11:40 at night, with her reading glasses down at the end of her nose. A single sealed envelope with Jennifer's name on it. Delia held it out without opening it. Jennifer looked at it. She took it. She did not open it. "I need to be alone for a minute," she said, and walked out onto the porch. The night was clear. The 3 dogs across the road had gone into Sandra's house long ago. The stars over the ridge were the same stars she had watched with her father when she was 7 years old, and he had taught her the names of 3 constellations, only 3, because he said that was all a person really needed to feel found. She sat down on the top step. She opened the envelope. The letter was 1 page. It was in his handwriting. It was undated. "Jenny, if you're reading this, I've messed up the timing again. I wanted to tell you about Rosemary's Kindness in person. I never quite worked up to it. Your mother and I started it after she got sick because we realized how many quiet things we hadn't done. It grew a little bigger than we meant. Sandra doesn't know. Marcus knows only about himself. Louise thinks it's the church. I wanted to keep going after I'm gone. You are the only person on this earth I trust with it. I know I have not earned that trust. I know I have let too many months go by between phone calls. I know I owe you 100 conversations. But if you're reading this, you're already the person I hoped you would be, because you're standing in my house, and you have not let anybody push you around, and you have not signed anything you didn't understand. Take care of Biscuit. Take care of the fund. Take care of yourself. Don't let anybody tell you what your father was before you've asked me first. And if I can't answer, ask Sandra. She knows. Dad." Jennifer sat on the porch for a long time. Then she went inside and put the letter in her jacket pocket and went back to the kitchen table, and she said, in a voice that surprised even her, "Miss Fontaine, tell me what we do." Delia set down her coffee. "We prove the letter of intent is a forgery," she said. "We prove your father's intentions with sworn statements from Sandra and Marcus and Dr. Ramirez, who I understand was in the ledger as well, and from anyone else who can be found in that shoebox by Friday. We filed to convert Rosemary's Kindness into a formal charitable trust with you as executor, and we asked the court to reject Mr. Halloran's petition on the basis of fraud. That's how we do it. It's a lot to do in 3 days." She looked around the table, "But I've seen it done in less." Marcus was already writing down phone numbers. Sandra was already reaching for her house key. Jennifer was already thinking about which conference room at the hospital she could use as an office by 7 a.m. Biscuit was already snoring softly on the quilt beside the door. The following morning at 6, Sandra came across the road with a small canvas tote bag and set it on the kitchen table. Inside was an old dash cam. "He put this in the truck 2 months ago," she said. "Halloran had come over yelling once already, and Carl told me he wanted a record of it if it happened again. I helped him wire it in. It was my son-in-law's, before my son-in-law bought a new one. Carl paid me $20 for it. I don't know if there's anything on it. I don't know how to check." Marcus took the dash cam. Marcus, it turned out, was a young man who understood technology the way his mother had understood herbs, instinctively, without ceremony. He took out the SD card. He put it into his laptop. The room went quiet. There were 47 video files. He opened them one by one, oldest first, and for the first 6 clips there was nothing worth watching. A possum crossing the driveway at dawn, Carl backing out to run to the feed store, a rainstorm at dusk. On the 7th clip, though, on a bright morning 3 days before Carl's death, Bruce Halloran's black pickup pulled up in the driveway. Marcus turned the laptop so that Jennifer and Sandra and Delia could see. The clip was 14 minutes long. It showed Bruce Halloran standing beside the truck in Carl's driveway. It showed him leaning down toward the driver's window. It showed him saying, the audio was thin but clear, "You are an old man, and you are going to die on this land whether you want to or not. And when you do, I will buy it from your daughter who does not care about it before you are cold. So sign the paper now, and I will pay you what you're worth. Otherwise, I will pay her half of what you're worth, and I will still own it." Then he had walked to his own truck and driven away. Jennifer watched the video twice. She was very quiet the second time. Marcus said, "We should show Ms. Fontaine." Sandra said, "We should show the sheriff." Jennifer said, "We should show both." By 9 a.m. that morning, they had. By 11, Delia had filed a motion. By 1 in the afternoon, the sheriff's investigator had opened a file. By 3, a courier had delivered a subpoena to Bruce Halloran's office for every letter and email in his files related to Carl Whitman, Maple Creek Road, or the 4 acres in question. Bruce Halloran did not return the courier's call. He did, however, call Jennifer directly. She answered because she had thought it might be Delia. "Miss Whitman," Halloran said, "we can still be reasonable about this. I don't know what your neighbors have been telling you, but I have a paper with your father's signature on it, and I have a right to that land. You are looking at a long, expensive court process for a piece of property you cannot manage from Knoxville. I am offering you a settlement, $200,000, clean, by end of day tomorrow. You take the money, I take the deed to the back 4 acres, everybody moves on." Jennifer said, "Mr. Halloran, I am going to hang up now, and if you contact me again, my lawyer will file a restraining order." She hung up. She was shaking. Marcus set a glass of water in front of her without a word. That afternoon, Jennifer and Marcus drove out to the reservoir to meet Louise Perkins. Delia had said on her way out the door that morning that they needed to gather every witness they could by Thursday night, and that some of them would be more willing to speak in person. Louise lived alone in a small cottage on a hill above the water, with a mailbox that had lost its flag and a garden that had gone to weeds around a single flourishing tomato plant. She was 79 years old. She had opened the door in a housecoat and taken one look at Jennifer's face and said, "You're Carl's girl. Come in. I've got tea." Jennifer sat at Louise's kitchen table for an hour. Louise told her that Carl had shown up at her door one November after a bad windstorm had ripped the gutters off the back of the cottage and had climbed a ladder in his 60s and put new gutters up in 2 days without letting Louise pay for the aluminum. She told her that the following February, Carl had shown up again with a check for the oil truck driver because Louise's pipes had almost frozen in a cold snap and she had been rationing the propane. She told her that every Christmas he had brought her a jar of Marcus's mother's fig preserves before Marcus's mother had died, and afterward a jar of local honey from Newport. She told her that she had assumed for years that this help came from the church. "He asked me not to say anything," Louise said. Her hands trembled around her teacup. "I honored that. I honored it right up to yesterday. And then I saw the truck being taken away on the news, and I told myself, Louise, you owe that man one thing at least, and that is your voice." She wrote out an affidavit at her kitchen table with a fountain pen. Her handwriting was strong. She signed her name at the bottom with a flourish. She handed the paper across to Jennifer and said, "You take that to your lawyer, and you tell her that Louise Perkins is prepared to say it in a courtroom in front of anyone she needs to say it in front of." Jennifer thanked her twice. Louise said, "You don't thank me, sweetheart. You keep the fund going. That's what you do." On the way back, they stopped at Danny Whitworth's shop on the highway. Danny was a thick-armed man of 50, with grease on his knuckles, who came out from under a lifted truck when Marcus called him by name. He stood in the shop bay, wiping his hands on a rag, and listening while Marcus explained. When Marcus finished, Danny stood very still for a moment and then said, quietly, "That man saved my shop. That man kept a roof over my son's head. That man never once asked for a favor back. You tell me where I need to be and what time, and I will be there in a clean shirt. Marcus nodded. Danny said, and you tell that Halloran son of a, you tell him if he shows up at my property again, I don't answer for what happens next. Just come to the hearing, Danny, Marcus said. I'll come, Danny said. Clean shirt, both hands washed. They drove home in silence for the first 10 miles. At 4 in the afternoon, Dr. Angela Ramirez arrived at Carl's house. She was the vet from the East Tennessee Companion Animal Rescue. She was in her 50s, with a long braid gone half gray, and she had come at Delia's request. She sat on the porch with Sandra and Jennifer and drank sweet tea and told them, in a voice that occasionally caught, about the 7 dogs Carl had funded the vet care for in the past year alone, and about the 6 kittens he had helped rehome in the winter, and about the way he had shown up at the rescue every 3rd Saturday morning to sweep floors and refill water bowls, and never once let them put his name on the donor wall. I have his signature on 11 checks, she said. I have him on 11 security camera videos. He came in a blue Ford pickup, and he wore a grey flannel shirt in the winter and a blue Oxford shirt in the summer. I will testify in court to every one of them. She reached down and put her hand on Biscuit's head. Biscuit lifted her muzzle and rested it, briefly, in Dr. Ramirez's palm. She remembers me, Dr. Ramirez said softly. I gave her her first vaccinations. She was 10 weeks old. She weighed 6 pounds. She hid in Carl's coat pocket the whole visit. Jennifer's eyes stung, but she also, sitting there on that porch, felt something shift inside her, a small, hard thing like a stuck door coming loose. She had spent the past 2 days finding out who her father was. She had spent the past 2 days learning she had not really known him. She had spent the past 2 days grieving twice, once for the man she had lost, and once for the years she had not known him well enough to lose him properly. And now, sitting on his porch with a rescue vet and a neighbor, and a young man her father had raised through school, she thought for the first time that maybe she could carry the thing her father had built, that maybe she could keep it. She looked at Dr. Ramirez. Would you, Jennifer said, consider being on the board of a foundation? Dr. Ramirez put her hand over her mouth. Sandra started laughing through fresh tears. Biscuit thumped her tail, twice this time. That night, Jennifer sat at her father's kitchen table until 2 in the morning writing, longhand on a yellow legal pad, a rough charter for something she and Delia had begun calling that afternoon the Rosemary Whitman Foundation for Rural Kindness. She wrote in the margin, dog food for Sandra, tuition for Marcus, vet bills for the rescue, rent bridge for Jenna Ruiz, shop rescue for Danny Whitworth, groceries for Louise Perkins. She underlined each line. She underlined the last one twice, the way her father had underlined the reminder about Biscuit's pill. She could feel him at the table with her. She was not the kind of woman who believed in that sort of thing, and she felt it anyway. Thursday brought the last of the witnesses. Jenna Ruiz arrived at 10 in the morning in a small silver car with a rear bumper held on by duct tape. She was 22, thin, with a cropped haircut and a nose ring and a pair of scrubs on because she'd come straight from the veterinary clinic. She did not sit down. She stood in Carl's living room with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, as if she was afraid that if she softened for even a moment, she would collapse. He gave me 6 months, she said. Her voice was low and controlled. He gave me 6 months of rent when I aged out of foster and had nothing. He never made me sign anything. He gave me the number of a woman who taught GED classes at the library. He drove me there the first 2 times because I was scared to walk in the door. He waited for me in the parking lot. She looked at Jennifer. I don't have anyone in this world who did what your father did for me. I don't know how to tell you what that means. I will say it in a courtroom if you need me to. I will say it anywhere. Jennifer stood up and crossed the living room and hugged her, and Jenna let her. And Jenna pressed her forehead into Jennifer's shoulder for 1 hard second before pulling back and saying, in a voice that was very close to normal, "What time on Friday? Tell me the time." and I will be there. 10 a.m., Jennifer said. The courthouse in Saverville. I'll be there, Jenna said, in a clean shirt. That afternoon at 3, an old woman named Nettie Bell called the house. She was Marcus's grandmother. She was 81 years old. She lived in a small brick house on the edge of Newport and had raised Marcus for the last 4 years since her daughter had died. She told Jennifer in a slow, careful voice that she had heard Bruce Halloran's voice through the screen door of her back porch on the afternoon 3 weeks before Carl's death. Because Halloran had followed Carl out of the parking lot of the feed store and had backed him up against the door of the blue truck and had said, and Nettie was going to repeat it now word for word so that Jennifer could write it down, "You will sell me that land, old man, or I will make the rest of your life hell." Nettie had been sitting on the far side of the parked truck with her walker, waiting for Marcus to come out with a bag of sugar. Halloran had not seen her. She had seen everything. "I will come to the hearing," Nettie said. "My grandson will drive me. You tell the lawyer I'm ready." Friday morning came. The hearing was scheduled for 10. Delia had filed her motion on Wednesday. Halloran had filed his letter of intent on Thursday afternoon, with an accompanying affidavit swearing to its authenticity. He had also filed at 4:59 in the afternoon on Thursday an emergency motion to have the property placed in probate escrow, a move that would freeze the estate for at least 90 days and force Jennifer to spend money she did not want to spend just to keep her father's front door unlocked. Delia had told Jennifer over the phone Thursday night that the escrow motion was a tactic, that it was designed to break her nerve, that she should sleep as many hours as she could and eat a real breakfast in the morning. Jennifer had slept 4 hours. She had eaten toast and half a banana at Sandra's kitchen table because Sandra had insisted, because Sandra had said, "You are not walking into that courtroom on air." She wore a black blazer she had not worn in 2 years. She wore her mother's small pearl earrings. She carried her father's leather ledger in a canvas bag, wrapped in a dish towel so that the leather wouldn't scuff. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected. It smelled like old wood and paper. Bruce Halloran was there in a navy suit with a lawyer beside him who wore an American flag pin on his lapel. Delia was there in a charcoal blazer. Behind her sat a small, quiet crowd. Sandra in a blouse she had ironed the night before, Marcus in a shirt and tie he had bought that morning, Dr. Ramirez still in her clinic jacket with a leash and empty carrier by her foot, Louise Perkins with her handbag on her lap, Danny Whitworth in a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled once, Jenna Ruiz still in scrubs, and, at the end of the row, Nettie Bell with her walker parked against the aisle. They had come for Carl. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. Delia presented the ledger. She presented Dr. Ramirez's affidavit. She presented Sandra's affidavit. She presented Louise Perkins's fountain pen affidavit, which the judge read with a small approving nod at the neatness of the handwriting. She presented the dashcam video, which the judge watched in complete silence, his jaw tightening the way jaws do when something small and mean has just been shown in public. She presented a handwriting expert's preliminary letter noting 3 deviations between Carl Whitman's known signature and the one on the letter of intent, the terminal loop of the W, the pressure on the first C, the angle of the H, and she presented, as the last exhibit, the sealed letter from Carl to Jennifer with its final line, offered to the court not as legal proof, but as evidence of a man's actual state of mind. Then she called Nettie Bell to the stand. Nettie walked to the witness stand, slowly, with her walker, and Marcus stood at the back of the courtroom, with his hands folded in front of him, and did not sit down until his grandmother was seated. Nettie put her right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. She looked directly at the judge. She looked directly at Bruce Halloran. She did not look away from Halloran once during the 11 minutes she spent on that stand. She repeated what she had heard word for word in a voice that was thin at the edges but steady in the middle, the voice of a woman who had lived long enough to know what she had heard when she had heard it. She said, "You will sell me that land, old man, or I will make the rest of your life hell." And then she said, "Judge, that man in the navy suit said those words, and he said them to my neighbor Carl Whitman, and he said them 3 weeks before Carl Whitman died, and I heard him with my own 2 ears." Bruce Halloran did not look at her. She stepped down from the stand, and Marcus walked her back to her seat, and she sat down, and she put both hands on the handle of her walker, and she did not say another word for the rest of the hearing. Delia stood. She said, "Your Honor, this is a case of an old man who was pressured, threatened, and after his death forged against in order to steal 4 acres from a woman who is standing here trying to honor her father's actual wishes. We ask the court to reject the petitioner's motion in its entirety and to authorize the estate to proceed under Miss Whitman's stewardship." Bruce Halloran's lawyer stood up. He spoke for 11 minutes. He argued about paperwork. He argued about the standing of the dash cam. He argued about the reliability of a shoebox of letters. He suggested delicately that a grieving daughter was not a reliable witness to her own father's intentions. At that, Jennifer saw Marcus's jaw set behind her, and she saw Sandra's hand find Louise's hand in the second row. The judge listened. He was a man of about 60, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a wedding ring worn thin. When Halloran's lawyer finished, the judge did not speak for what felt like a long time. Then he took off his glasses, folded them, and set them down on the desk. "Mr. Halloran," he said, "stand up, please." Halloran stood. "Sir," the judge said, "I have spent 31 years on this bench, and in that time I have learned to distinguish a signed document from a signed man. What I have seen in the last 2 hours, in my judgment, is not a real estate transaction. It is an attempt to take advantage of a grieving family. I am rejecting your petition in its entirety. I am referring the letter of intent, along with the dashcam recording, to the District Attorney's Office for review as possible fraud, and contingent on the District Attorney's review, possible attempted intimidation of a witness. I am authorizing the estate of Carl Whitman to proceed under his daughter's stewardship without probate escrow. And I am ordering that you have no contact with this family, this property, or any witness who spoke here today, pending the District Attorney's review. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Halloran said. His face had gone the color of bad milk. "Good," the judge said. He turned to Jennifer. "Miss Whitman," he said, "I did not know your father. I've read your affidavit, and I've read the letter he left you. I want you to know that I am sorry for your loss, and I want you to know that this court believes what your father wrote." Jennifer stood up because she felt like she should. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady. She had not expected it to be. The judge nodded. He picked up his glasses. He put them back on his head. "Court is adjourned," he said. Outside the courthouse, on the courthouse steps, Sandra put her arm around Jennifer's shoulders and did not say a word. Marcus stood on Jennifer's other side. Delia was already on her phone. Dr. Ramirez had already crossed the parking lot to a small white van and was opening the back door. Louise Perkins had linked her arm through Nettie Bell's and was walking her slowly toward the ramp. Danny Whitworth was leaning against a railing with his arms crossed, watching the parking lot. Bruce Halloran walked past them on his way to his own car. He did not look at any of them. His lawyer walked 6 steps ahead of him and did not look back. Danny straightened up. He said quietly, "Keep walking, buddy." He said it once, at a normal speaking volume, without any threat in it, and Halloran did not turn his head. Danny watched him get into his black pickup. He watched him back out. He watched him drive away. Then Danny turned and said to Jennifer, "You need anything else, you call, and I mean anything." "I will," Jennifer said. "I will, Danny." Marcus watched Halloran's truck disappear around the bend. Then Marcus said softly, "He drove past the truck that morning." Jennifer turned. "What?" "On the dash cam. There's another file. I hadn't finished going through them all last night. There's a file from the morning your father died. Halloran drove past the house at 7:12 in the morning. He drove past slow. He saw the truck sitting there, and he didn't stop. Sandra put her hand to her mouth. He saw, Sandra whispered. He saw, Marcus said. Jennifer did not say anything. She looked across the parking lot at Bruce Halloran's black pickup driving out onto the road. She thought of her father slumped against the wheel of a truck at 7:12 in the morning. She thought of Biscuit lying beside him for 2 more days. She turned away. "Give the file to the sheriff," she said. "I already did," Marcus said. "Last night." Jennifer closed her eyes. "Good," she said. The district attorney would open a formal investigation the following Monday. Bruce Halloran would be indicted 11 weeks later on 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of attempted grand theft by fraud, and 1 count of criminal deprivation of an incapacitated adult. That last one because his failure to stop at a stationary vehicle where a man he had actively harassed was clearly slumped at the wheel would be reviewed by a grand jury as depraved indifference. He would take a plea deal in the fall. He would pay a fine that would not break him. He would lose his development license in the state of Tennessee. His name would appear in the Sevier County Herald under the headline, "Local Developer Pleads to Fraud in Whitman Estate Case," and 140 people would read it, and 80 of them would be people whose lives Carl Whitman had touched. None of that would happen for months. What happened next, in the hour after the hearing, was that Jennifer walked back into her father's house with Sandra and Marcus and Dr. Ramirez and Delia, and sat down on the couch, and Biscuit came to her feet and put her head on Jennifer's knee. And Jennifer thought about her mother. She thought about how she had not known Rosemary either, at the end. She had come up from Knoxville for the funeral. She had helped clean out the closet. She had not stayed a week. She had not been the kind of daughter her mother deserved, and she had not been the kind of daughter her father deserved. And she was, at 44 years old, discovering how many people had loved her parents in her place. And she was learning that they had not held it against her. That was the part that broke her in the end. She started crying and could not stop. Sandra sat down beside her and did not try to make her stop. Marcus went into the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. Dr. Ramirez sat down in the armchair across from her and put her hands on her knees and simply waited. Delia stood by the door and did the honest thing a good lawyer does at moments like that. She looked at her feet and gave the woman the room. Jennifer cried for a long time. When she finished, she blew her nose on a paper napkin Sandra handed her, and she took a long, shaky breath, and she said, "I want to move back." Sandra looked at her. "Sweetheart," she said carefully. "I mean it," Jennifer said. "Not this month. Maybe not for a year. But I want to move back. I can work from here. I can run the foundation from here. I can be here." Marcus smiled. Dr. Ramirez smiled. Sandra reached over and squeezed Jennifer's hand hard enough that Jennifer felt the wedding band Sandra still wore. "Your daddy would like that," Sandra said. "I know," Jennifer said. "That's why I'm doing it." Biscuit lifted her head. She looked at Jennifer. She thumped her tail, just once, then again, then a third time. The following months moved fast. The foundation was formalized in October. Dr. Ramirez became the board's veterinary chair. Delia Fontaine became its legal counsel. Marcus Bell, who graduated in the spring, as his mother would have wanted, in a black gown with a stethoscope draped around his neck, and his grandmother Nettie sitting in the front row of the auditorium with tears rolling down her cheeks, became the foundation's first paid administrative director at a modest salary that he insisted twice was more than he needed. Sandra Kowalski became the foundation's community liaison, an unpaid role that mostly involved knowing everyone in 3 counties and remembering exactly who needed what and when. Jennifer moved out of her Knoxville apartment in November. She did not sell it, she kept it for the hospital work that would still take her back once a week. But she moved her clothes and her books and her mother's silver coffee service into the house on Maple Creek Road. She painted the guest bedroom pale yellow, the color her mother had always said she wanted in her own kitchen but had never gotten around to. She put her mother's photograph on the mantel next to Rosemary's so that they could look out from the same shelf. Biscuit slept at the foot of her bed every night. The foundation's first year did nothing that would make the news. It paid Danny Whitworth's shop lease for one bad month in February when the pipes burst and the insurance was slow. It paid Louise Perkins' oil bill again the next December, without Louise asking and without a note. It gave Jenna Ruiz a small grant to buy scrubs and a stethoscope for the certification program she had enrolled in at the community college. It bought bags of dog food for Sandra's dogs and for 4 other families on Maple Creek Road who had had a hard summer. It sponsored 6 vaccinations at Dr. Ramirez's rescue and rehomed 2 litters of kittens. None of that would make the news. All of that would make a life. Sandra brought her 3 dogs across the road one Saturday afternoon in the fall. Rocky, Duke, and June came in one at a time, hesitantly, and Biscuit, who had put on 8 pounds and whose fur had come back thick and gold, stood up on the porch to meet them. They circled her the way old friends circle a friend who has come back from a long trip. They pressed their noses to her sides. Rocky lay down at her feet and pressed his ear to her paw. Duke wagged his tail so hard he nearly knocked over a potted geranium. Little brown June sat in the doorway and looked up at Jennifer with the calm, attentive gaze of a dog who has decided that a new person will do. The 3 dogs had not forgotten who had listened for them. They had not forgotten who had listened for her. The last time Bruce Halloran drove down Maple Creek Road was on a Tuesday in December. He was not supposed to be there. The restraining order was still in place, but he came anyway, once, slowly, in the same black pickup, at 7:12 in the morning. He did not stop. He did not look at Carl's house. He did not look at Sandra's. He drove past once, and Sandra saw him from her kitchen window and picked up her phone, and by 7:15 his license plate was on file with the sheriff's office as a documented violation of the restraining order, and the district attorney was preparing to seek the maximum penalty. He did not come back. The 3 dogs across the road watched him go. They did not bark. They lay flat in the yard, quiet in the winter light, as if they had done their part a long time ago and were content now to simply witness. On the spring evening, about a year after Carl died, Jennifer sat down on the top step of her father's porch with a glass of tea. Biscuit lay beside her, chin on her paws, watching the road. Across the way, Sandra was watering her tomatoes. Rocky and Duke and June were lying in the grass by the fence. A school bus went by, and Sandra waved at the driver, and the driver honked twice, the way he had honked twice for Carl every afternoon for 20 years. Jennifer took her father's letter out of her pocket. She had carried it folded for a year. She unfolded it in the late-day light. She read the last line one more time. "Don't let anybody tell you what your father was before you've asked me first. And if I can't answer, ask Sandra. She knows." Jennifer folded the letter. She put it back in her pocket. She rested her hand on Biscuit's head. She said quietly, "You knew." Biscuit thumped her tail against the boards of the porch. The dogs behind Sandra's fence, 20 yards away, did not stir. They lay in the grass with their heads on their paws, watching the road, quiet as they had been for months, because someone had listened, because someone had come, because the story had ended the way it should have ended, and they did not have anything to bark at anymore. Jennifer sat there until the sun went down. She thought about her father coming out of the front door of the house behind her on some ordinary morning in July with a grocery list in his pocket and a golden retriever at his heel. She thought about him opening the door of the truck and leaning in and putting his hand on the wheel and pausing there, because his chest had suddenly felt strange and small. She thought about him not being afraid. She thought about Biscuit hopping through the gap in the passenger window because he had said her name, because he had always said her name, because he had been the kind of man who said the name of every dog he ever loved out loud in a soft voice like it was a small prayer. She thought about all of that and she did not cry. She had done her crying. She had done a year's worth of crying, and she was tired of it. And her father would have been tired of it too. He had never liked a fuss. She stood up. Biscuit stood up with her. They went inside together and turned off the porch light. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and to tell somebody in the comments about a quiet person in your own life who did more than you knew. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe so you can hear the next one, because there are more stories like Carl Whitman's than any of us realize, and every one of them is worth listening to.